Hello there, my name is Sally Ibbotson and I'm a Shiatsu practitioner and a Qigong teacher here in northeast Scotland in forests near Inverness. And I practice Qigong in the community. I've also worked in the NHS and in the hospice movement with dying people. But I specialise in personal Qigong forms, and that's sometimes called medical Qigong, where as an Oriental medical practitioner and also as a practitioner of shamanism, I interview you in order to get insight into your elemental makeup. That is, how much of each element is a resource for you. So, in Oriental terms, we're made up of 5 elements, and in this particular philosophy that would be metal, wood, air, water and fire, although that differs in different philosophies. And it's usually the case that we have one dominant go-to element. So for example, if I use myself, I am probably earth dominant. So I have an abundance of the earth element, which gives me quite good muscular system. It allows me to employ my senses well, so my senses all work very well. And I like to be outside. That's often, so my go-to would be to work outside or to go for a walk outside in nature. That's very, very simply put. It has to be said. And I don't worry very much as well, so that could also be something that I would pick up on. So that's my go-to element. But in life, because we've got 5 elements, if we rely too heavily on one, and we could say that's an addiction. So my behaviour of always going for a walk when I'm in need of it, or exercising on a muscular level, is a kind of a bit of an addiction, or even food addiction. So I love food, but it could become addictive if I relied too heavily on the earth element for support. And so in an interview for personal Qigong, we'd look at the whole elemental balance of a person. But where it gets really interesting is we look for the missing element, and now I would look to shamanism to explain this. So in shamanic terms, it's always been the case for millennia that shamans recognized something called soul retrievals, which bring the person into wholeness. And there's a real similarity between that and what we do with what's called a rediscovery journey in personal Qigong. So here to explain it more. When we've had some kind of shock or trauma in life, and that can even be preconception, so we work in this practice from conception, so when you visualize coming into life even. Anywhere along the line, but usually before language, because that's when we're most vulnerable to what adults tell us is our consensus reality. There can be some kind of a shock or trauma, and what that can mean is that one part of us, in shamanic terms that would be part of the soul, goes off to protect itself. And in Chinese medical terms or Oriental medical terms, that would be one of the elements. So we no longer call on that element for a resource because it's tucked away safely, still protecting itself from perceived shock or trauma, or from something that's happened. Let me give you an example. So, let me think of an example from my own life. Would be that at a very early age, I was told to be quiet. And without going too much into that, this is not psychotherapy, by the way, and I'm not a psychotherapist. I've trained with psychotherapists, but I'm not a psychotherapist myself. I am a counsellor. And anyway, so I was told at a very early age, prelingual, that I should be quiet. And that had huge impact, and still does, on me as a person. And it was a huge shock as well that I should be quiet as a little one. And so part of my elemental makeup, and in this case, I won't go into the details, but in this case it was something called primordial fire, part of the element of fire, went away from me in order to keep itself safe, so that when the environment became safe again and I had collected enough wherewithal as an adult woman, it would come back. So I could then use the element of primordial fire, and that actually happens to be of self-love, self-compassion and self-value for myself at this time. But if I had called it back earlier, then it would have been detrimental. So there's always good timing to this. So we can address past trauma, however far back in the past, which often, if it's not resolved or even witnessed, actually not necessarily resolved, but witnessed and loved, brought into loving awareness, can often repeat. So that would mean that there would continue to be issues around when to speak or how to speak, etc., potentially for all of this life that I'm living, if it weren't for awareness and for the work that I've done with people. And so in the rediscovery journey, let's take me as an example, there's a slight trance state, very, very safe, no drugs, no plants, no herbs, induced in the person, very, very slight. And we travel back through life to wherever life wants to take us, to see if we can isolate, and it doesn't really matter which traumatic event it is, just one, so we get a pattern of being able to influence the past by examining it lovingly with all the resources that we have here in the present. And the way this relates to Qigong is that Qigong and shamanism have very similar roots. So the dances that originated in China, which is, I'm sure they originated in many places, but that's my knowledge, were often shamanic, the dances of shamanic priests calling in that case, climate or good weather or good fortune or health or healing for individuals and communities. And those dances then became Qigong because it was noticed that certain movements had certain effects, and these observations are thousands of years old. And so in our personal Qigong form we can call back the element, and there are specific movements. So for example, for my primordial fire, I'm using the palms of the hands, particular acupuncture points, to call back primordial fire in a certain movement that opens certain acupuncture points and meridians to self-love and self-compassion. Those of you who know Oriental medicine, we're talking about the heart, and we're talking also about the pericardium. So we can start to address issues, and sometimes they're in older adulthood, that originated in our childhood without going through psychotherapy, and full respect to the psychotherapeutic industry, full respect. But this is not psychotherapy, this is a very gentle way of acknowledging that trauma and shock has happened, and that it's still reverberating through life, and can we gently do something about that and redress the balance. There are many other aspects to personal Qigong, so we look at your go-to resource, as I've said, the element that supports you in life, the one you go to if that one's tired. So often we have two other elements that we can go to. So for example, if I can't go running or do my muscular exercise, then I might meditate. So water is on my side, is a resource that I would go to. Again, that's really simply put, but that could also be fire. And fire is also a resource of mine, simple fire. No need to go too much into Oriental medicine, but I hope that gives you a flavour of what a personal Qigong form, and a session with me, an interview on elemental balance, might be, and I'm more than happy to speak through this in more detail before you commit. So the whole package is an interview, which might include a rediscovery journey, a personal Qigong form to be done every day for about 30 days, takes about 15 minutes, the form, based on calling in an element, supporting elements that aren't supported. And then 3 calls, so a call a week later, and then 2 weeks later, and then right at the end to review and to see how we go forward, unless that's all done and complete. And at the moment that costs £80, but please check. That whole package with the video costs £80, but please check my website, which I will put on the write-up to this YouTube video. Thank you very much for listening.